Hey, I want to welcome all of our online campus folks. Thanks so much for joining us wherever and whenever you are watching. And for those of you watching our Harvest Homes, so great to see you. And I certainly hope you are challenged by this message. We would love for you to like us and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You can go to harvest.247, and you can also go to harvest247.org. You can find out more about our church, about our beliefs. And of course, if you want to partner with us financially, you can do that there as well. And we are continuing this series called Taboo, Championing the Untouchables. And we're walking through some of the instances in the book of Luke where Jesus engaged people that society would say are untouchable. And our hope with that is that we can glean on how we are to engage people that maybe society would deem untouchable. And that we would have a heart of compassion as we begin to see how Jesus engaged with people that society thought were untouchable. And so this week, we are going to talk about a tax collector. And so have you ever felt undesired or not desired, or however you want to phrase it? So when we were pastoring in Colorado, it's kind of a funny thing that happened. But we had a person on our staff who had a birthday party that Sarah and I did not get invited to. And so our whole staff had this birthday party that we were not invited to. And I get it, right? I mean, if you're having a birthday party and then your boss is there, like, we do hang out, we are kind of friends, but ultimately I'm the boss, and maybe sometimes you just don't want the boss to be around. Totally get it, understandable. But when we found out about it, it kind of made us feel undesired. I mean, we're kind of like, man, people must not like us. And so really felt like we were on the outs there. And I'm sure you felt that way too. I'm sure you've been searching on Facebook and you've seen a dinner that all of your friends went to but you didn't know about, or a vacation that somebody went on, or a group of friends that you always vacation with, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, they went on vacation and I didn't find out about it. You know, maybe it's kind of one of those things where you got terminated from a job and you thought, man, I'm just really undesired right now. People don't want me, or this particular company doesn't really want me. Or maybe sometimes you were stood up for that coffee appointment and you were really looking forward to connecting, and then all of a sudden you got ghosted, or all of a sudden you got a text, hey, I can't make it, we'll do it another time, but that another time has never come. And there's so many instances where we probably felt undesired, or that people just did not want us around. Well, you have tuned in on the right week if you've ever felt that way, or you're feeling that right now. Because here's what I want to say to you just right up front, and that is this, is that Christ calls the undesirables. Meaning a prerequisite to be a Jesus follower is that you are undesirable. And Jesus calls them. And there's no greater testimony of that than how Jesus called a tax collector to actually be one of his disciples. So Luke 5:27, we'll read it. After this, he went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, follow me. And leaving everything, he rose and followed him. Now we're going to kind of explore why he might have that response here in just a moment. And Levi made him a great feast in his house. And there was a large company of tax collectors and others reclining at the table with them. And the Pharisees and their scribes grumbled at his disciples, saying, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus answered them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but call sinners to repentance. So Christ calls the undesirables. So let's zoom in on this story a little bit with Levi and why this might be a big deal. In Jewish culture, tax collectors were considered traitors because they worked for the Roman government. So if you were Jewish and now you were a tax collector, other Jewish people, especially the scribes and Pharisees, are like, you've turned our back on us, you are a traitor to us, now you're working against us. And so, of course, they didn't like that. Now, we know how the story unfolds and we can kind of read to the end, but put yourself in that situation. I mean, if somebody's ever kind of turned their back on you or you felt like they were a traitor, you don't really want to have anything to do with them either, right? I mean, you might want to have some words with them, but they're not kind words, they're choice words that you may want to have with them. And so the Jewish people really kind of kept these people at a distance. Here's what happens, though, and why they didn't like it. Tax collectors could keep whatever they collected. Therefore, Jewish people rightfully saw them as extortioners. So if you had a certain amount of tax that you owed, but the tax collector taxed you more, anything on top, they got to keep. When a Jew entered the customs service, he was regarded as an outcast in Jewish society, meaning he was disqualified from being a judge, he was excommunicated from the synagogue, and they were a disgrace to their family. Now, this particular person, Levi, is who we know as Matthew. So Levi is a tax collector, someone on the outside, and it's not just that Jesus goes and dines with him. Jesus makes him one of his disciples and actually changes his name, because that's what Jesus does. He takes who we were and rebirths us into who we are becoming as we follow him. So he changes his name, and his name becomes Matthew. I mean, why would Matthew just get up and follow somebody? Right? Well, if you think about Jesus, Jesus was seen to be like a rabbi. People would call him rabbi. And in Jewish culture, you could have no greater honor, or one of the greatest honors is for a rabbi to actually call you to come and study underneath them. So in the Jewish culture, when Jesus would walk by and say, hey, come and follow me, he's seen as a rabbi, he's seen as a leader, he's seen as a spiritual leader. And so for a Jewish person, they're like, yeah, absolutely, I want to go and follow him. I want to follow in his footsteps. So that's one reason. The second reason is this, is that if you were someone who was an outcast, but then you were all of a sudden engaged and said, hey, come and be with me, you're going to be excited about that. So Levi throws a party. And he invites all of his tax collector friends and all of his sinner friends and say, hey man, out of everybody that we know, Jesus is the one that is willing to call us, willing to be around us when everybody else felt like we were untouchable or undesired. That's a big deal. If you have ever spent some time with someone who is not accepted, then what you would come to know is when you begin to accept them, when you begin to invite them, it makes a big impression on their life. Because they're thinking, finally, out of all the people I've engaged with, there's this one person that actually wants me to be around when nobody else wants me to be around. Because Jesus calls the undesirables. That's what he does. He engages with them. He talks with them. And he says, hey, come and follow me. Now, when you look at Pharisees, let's take a little bit. Let's not give them a bad rap, okay? I think they oftentimes get a bad rap, and we're going to kind of have a little funny thing here in just a moment. But they didn't want to rebel against God and be sold into slavery again. So they're looking at Jewish history and saying, man, if we go down this path and we begin to allow all these things and we don't hold true to the 600 and something commandments that we've made, we could be sold into slavery again like we had been before. We could lose our kingdom again. So let's give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. But they did have a judgmental attitude toward others, and what created a wall and a bridge. In a book, Unchristian by David Kinnaman, being judgmental is one of the things that unbelievers, people outside the church, believe about Christians. Actually, I think about 88% say that people who follow Jesus are judgmental. So what happens when we're judgmental is we build walls, and that's what the Pharisees were doing. Instead of building a bridge and creating that relationship, they were building walls to keep people out. Now, there's a comedian, and if you grew up in the South, you know him as Jeff Foxworthy. And I thought, as I was writing this, we might have a little fun with this, just some levity in the midst of a sermon. And he used to do, you might be a redneck if, you said a word in your window, like a bird flew in your window, okay? But I was thinking, let's do this. You might be a Pharisee if, okay? You might be a Pharisee if your words don't match your actions. You might be a Pharisee if your greatest desire to give is when others are watching. You might be a Pharisee if your main focus is your reputation. You might be a Pharisee if you are equally good at finding others' sin as denying your own. And you might be a Pharisee if you judge the service of others when you don't serve yourself. If you got offended by that, any of those, just going to say, you might want to do a little heart inspection because you might be a Pharisee. So, when we see what Jesus is doing here, what we are coming to understand is this, is that Christ calls the undesirables. He looks at people that were undesirable and he says, but I want you on my team. He looks at people who are far off and he says, but I want you to come close. And he did it with me and you. He did it with me and you because we were all undesirable, but Jesus came to build the bridge to make a way so that people could spend eternity with him in heaven by just believing that he is the Son of God. He died on the cross and he rose 3 days later. And if you are someone watching this, I'd love for you to leave a comment below if you want to explore that question. And if you're somebody in a Harvest Home, your Harvest Home leader would love to talk to you about that as well. Because Christ calls the undesirables. Now, I want to talk about 2 closing principles. The first comes from verse 27 and 28 about following. The first thing is we want to teach people to follow Jesus. Following Jesus leads us away from other things. For so long in the church, we've taught behavior modification. What we want to do is we want to teach people to follow Jesus. Because behavior modification won't last, just like that new diet you started. Won't last. Teaching people to follow Jesus is a longer ride. It's a longer process, but it is a ride that will lead to a better destination. When people follow Jesus, they bear fruit. And their fruit is the determination. We were gifted a black axe when we lived in Colorado. It was one of the best gifts we've ever gotten. And so I began to cut down trees. We cut down 17 trees in our yard in Colorado. And it was awesome. Great exercise, but just a fun thing to do. And one of the things is that when you cut down a tree, if you think that it's dead, you can find out for sure because as you cut it down, you inspect the roots, you inspect the rings, you inspect on the tree, you see branches that aren't bearing fruit or they're not, blooming anything, and there's nothing blossoming, and you say, man, that tree is dead. Well, here's the thing. The same thing that's true of people who follow Jesus. You can know if they're following Jesus by inspecting their fruit. And are they following Jesus, and are they leading others to help follow Jesus as well? There's a man by the name of Rick who went to our church in Colorado. He was an alcoholic and had just been divorced. And he just showed up at our church and said, hey, I just need to get back in a relationship with God. And on the first Sunday, he signed up to serve. Told us his story. We said, hey, come back on Monday. We'll get you signed up. We'll do all this kind of stuff. And he was there. And then Rick began to greet people, and Rick began to walk old ladies out to their car, and Rick began to engage people, and Rick began to just have this amazing demeanor toward people. He began to follow Jesus. He began to get discipled. He got baptized, all that. And here's the thing. We would look at Rick, and he was not perfect. Would he have relapses? Yeah, he would have relapses. Did he let a cuss word fly here or there? Yeah, less and less as we went on. But here's the thing. We knew Rick was following Jesus because we can inspect his fruit. He may not have looked the part, sounded the part, or had the background of the part, but you could see the fruit in his life. You could see how he was loving people and how he was really pursuing Jesus. He was undesirable to others, but here's the thing. Christ calls the undesirable. And the second thing I want to kind of lean in on here is hanging out with the unchurched. It's so amazing that Levi, who would be Matthew, had this interaction with Jesus, and he invited Jesus to his house, but he didn't just invite Jesus, he invited all the other tax collectors, all the other people who were undesirable as well. And I know it's easy, and especially in the world today, it's getting harder, right, to hang out with people that don't have our same view or maybe don't believe the same things that we believe in, and there's more polarization and whatnot. But here's the thing. Jesus ate with undesired people. And as we begin to engage with people and we begin to say to them, hey, you're not undesirable to me, Hey, I want to be around you. I want to hang out with you. And it may not be my friends that I've always known, and it might be uncomfortable, but here's the deal. When you begin to show that kind of love to someone and you say, I'm a follower of Jesus, and I'll come and eat with you, or I'll sit with you, or I'll hang out with you, guess what that person's going to do? They're going to begin to bring other people along with them. And so that challenge is to hang out with unchurched. How many unchurched friends do you think that you have? Or how many unchurched friends do you meet or actually engage with? And that's a question that's convicting to me. Especially being a pastor, it's much harder because you're always giving your time here or there or whatever. So it's much harder. We have to be intentional about it, because if we want to see the harvest, we're gonna have to intentionally reach out to people that maybe in the past we wouldn't hang out with, but now we understand that Jesus calls the undesirables, and I was once undesirable and he called me. Matthew is joyful that one of his own, another fellow Jew, is engaging with him, because all the other Jewish people saw him as an outcast. He was undesirable. But Christ calls the undesirables. And Jesus in Luke 5:31 through 32, he tells us why he came. And he also is telling us why we are here. And he says this, and Jesus answered them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Listen, the prerequisite to follow Jesus is that you're undesirable, that I was once undesirable. But Jesus has come for the sick. He's come from the undesirable. He's come for those people. And so, as we're kind of winding this down, the question is this, it's like, who are you hanging out with that's undesirable? Who is it that you can show Jesus to that might have previously thought they were undesirable, but you can show them the love of Christ and they can say, wow, somebody actually wants to engage with me, not just physically, but also spiritually. And that I believe that I don't have to have it all together to come to Jesus, because we're all in process. And our mission statement is so that all people may know Jesus and grow with him. Well, how are they going to know him if we don't go to them? How are they going to begin to know his love if we don't show that? And so my challenge to you this week is this, is that no matter where you're watching, when you're watching, no matter what city you live in or whatnot, who is somebody that you can show the love of Christ to this week that might be undesirable? Is it someone who's homeless? Is it someone who is sick? Is it someone who has a rough background? Is it someone who has a foul mouth? Is it someone who's still struggling with alcoholism? Who is it that you can show the love of Christ to that might be undesirable? Because here's the point. You were once undesirable. I was once undesirable. We were all once undesirable, but Christ calls the undesirable. And if you're watching this and you're feeling undesired, I need you to know that Christ loves you, he wants you, and so do we. You are desired. And that feeling undesirable and being undesirable doesn't disqualify you from a relationship with Jesus. Because Jesus came for all those who were undesired. He came for those who were sick. He came for those who were pushed on the margin, so that he can show the love of Christ and the love of God to those people, so they may be able to spend eternity with him. So who is it this week that you need to zero in on and begin to pray and say, God, lead me to that person and allow me to share my story, and that be a testimony, but also to show your love through saying, hey, I want to come and engage you. Because here's the deal. Christ calls the undesirables. He called you, he called me, and wherever you're at, he wants you to follow him. God bless you.